Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar, and we hope to have a great conversation for the next hour, a little bit. My name's Phil Fersht. I'm your host and moderator. Probably know me, I'm the CEO of HFS Research. And today I'm very excited to be joined by our Global Advisory Board. We've got a whole bunch on here who will introduce themselves shortly. And we're going to be talking a bit about topic du jour, AI at a crossroads. So what's the state of the industry? What does it look like? What are the big issues that we're seeing right now in terms of trust and execution? We love shaping the narrative at HFS. There's a few things that you may well remember us for. RPA back in the day, One Office, which is still very much to the fore today, things like the generative enterprise. Service as a software, which is now really starting to hit the streets. And also our AI first deal lab, which was launched last year, which is proving very, very popular with a whole bunch of enterprises as they try and shift their engagements and contracts from sort of legacy effort-based models to ones that are driven by outcomes with AI embedded at the core. And then we trademarked services as software last year, which we're pretty proud of. Anyway, let's jump into today's conversation, and I'm going to ask each of these folks in turn to give themselves a very quick introduction as to where they are today after their amazing contributions to industry. So Malcolm, if you can kick this off.
Thanks, Phil. Great to be here with this group. I've been in this industry, 35 years now, and been fortunate enough to be with a lot of fast growers that have ridden different waves from client server to offshoring cloud. And this is the biggest of all of them. And it's going to be fundamental and transformative. So glad to be part of this conversation.
Terrific. And next up is Stephen Hill. Steve, good to see you.
Hey, Phil, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. I'm Steve Hill. I'm a former vice chair of KPMG and currently working with firms like Oak Trust Group, who are at the intersection of AI, cybersecurity, and data. I think Frank is spot on. This is transformational. This is a big S-curve jump for human productivity. And there's a lot to be explored, a lot to be learned, and certainly a lot to experience in this. So happy to be here.
Good. Someone else who I've known for over a couple of decades, Mark Hodges.
I knew you were going to point me as soon as you dated that. Mark Hodges with Acresis. We work with founder-owned tech companies, usually 5 million to 50 million in tech and tech services. AI is all over the place in our clients, and we help teach them how to sell to large enterprises, which is a difficult sales process, as most of us know. And ultimately, we help them get capital or sell the company. And I'm knocking on wood when we say this, but over the last 9 years, we're 37 for 37. So we're very good at getting that founder objective achieved.
Terrific. And somebody who I met not long after Mark, Cliff Justice. How are you doing, Cliff?
Hey, Phil. How are you? Thanks for having me. So Cliff Justice, 30 years in the industry. I started off my career as a entrepreneur, which was short-lived. Worked for a healthcare company for a few years. Moved to Silicon Valley. Participated in an internet startup in Silicon Valley. That's where I met Mark. Joined Equiterra. Helped build Equiterra in the 2000s, and then joined KPMG, and then acquired Equiterra and integrated Equiterra into KPMG, and so operated that business for a while, and then took over for Steve as the head of innovation at KPMG, and have been in that role for the last 7 years. I retired at the end of last year. So now I'm pursuing independent investments in startups and some disruptive opportunities in the professional services space. So really glad to be here. Happy to share some insights and thoughts and whatever I can contribute to this robust panel.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you all to define retirement at some point, because it doesn't sound like retirement to me. Next up is a dear voice in the industry, Mary Lasty. How are you doing, Mary?
I'm awesome. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm coming to you from our campus at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And I'm a teacher and a professor, and I've been doing research studying all you guys for over 30 years. And my research and teaching really focuses on how to big, old, traditional incumbent enterprises get business value from AI. So I'm excited to learn from this panel as well as to share what we've learned so far.
Great, thank you, Mary. And last but very much not least, Jesus Mantis. How are you doing, Jesus?
Hey guys, I'm Jesus, and I think I will say graduated instead of retired. I graduated from IBM. I was leading the business consulting unit. I was there for 23 years. Prior to that, I was a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And what I'm doing recently is I'm in a few boards. So I'm in the board of a company called Biogen that is a biotech, a company called International Flavors and Fragrances, which touches one in three things that we all like smell or eat. A company called Neurofab, which is in the area of neuromorphic computing. A company called DVLP Medicines, which is applying AI to the drug development process. And the most recent one is in the board of Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, which is one of the largest funders of ethical AI applied to societal problems.
That's fantastic. Yeah, Patrick McGovern was he was the former founder of IDC, wasn't he? I remember meeting him several years ago. Yeah.
He was very committed to both the brain and the ethical use of technology.
Yeah,
so.
That's right. Yeah, I remember him. Good. Let's get into the first question du jour. And my favorite topic is the AI velocity gap, where fear is your biggest competitor. So as individuals, we're sprinting ahead because we can tolerate imperfection. But as enterprises, it's like the Monday experience. It's siloed systems, tribal knowledge, compliance paralysis. How do we close this gap? Because I think enterprises are going to lose their top talent if they can't really embed AI as well as we're doing in our personal lives. Maybe, Mary, would you like to kick us off with how you're seeing this evolve?
Sure. Yes. So I think we're beating up on our big old incumbents a little too much sometimes, because they do face realities that we as individuals don't, right? They do have to mitigate risks, and they do have to comply with all laws and regulations. I'm really excited about studying industry leaders and how they navigate this. And probably the bad news is they didn't start when ChatGPT came out. They started a long time ago. And so you also talk a lot about data debt and technical debt, and they've largely dealt with that. So they're in a better position then to launch off and get business value from AI initiatives. I'll just say some of the questions that we like to ask as researchers is, what is different for a large enterprise about governing and managing AI from other types of innovations, and what kinds of new practices do they need to contend with? And I'm just going to share one because I know you like to give takeaways to your audience. I think we're really finding that in the future, every leader is really going to be managing both a human and a digital workforce. And just like you don't want to micromanage your employees, you don't want to micromanage your agents, but you also have to have a kill switch. And I love this analogy we learned from one of our retailers. Is like they don't micromanage their human employees, but if one of them goes rogue, bam, they have security measures. Immediately you isolate, you deny the access. And they're saying they're building the same types of things for their AI agents, that there is a kill switch if that agent goes rogue. And I'm sure we have a lot more practices to share, but I'll pass it on to the next person you would like to call on.
Mark, you look like you're poised to interject here. So.
Yes, I think what's surprising when selling to large enterprises and trying to get them to adopt a new technology is how siloed and fiefdoms they are, and how they equate the size of their budget and the number of people to their success, and how they get paid for it. So I think that the compensation scheme hasn't caught up to how many bots you manage, or the outputs or the business outcomes that HFS does a great job of emphasizing to its vendors. So there are many techniques we can talk about on this webinar later about how you foster or force that interaction between the different fiefdoms to adopt something as revolutionary as AI. And I think the enterprises that have done well with RPA and intelligent automation, how they introduce that and how they govern it, they're going to be a lot more successful at taking advantage of AI, in our view. Back to you, Phil.
Right. Okay. I'll also ask the views of Steve Hill. You've seen a whole plethora of tech impact industry. Do you see this gap as very real, Steve? And what can we do to close it?
Yeah, I think the gap is real, and I think the gap is very human. And I said there's sort of three things that I think this gap is created by in a large sense. One of them is the noise in the marketplace. There's so much wash around AI that it's confusing. And I think organizations, when they're not confident that they know what they're getting into, that's a problem. And when I say, what are we talking about? AI is not AI. It's, you have deterministic systems, you have probabilistic, you have agents that are some of them are orchestrating, you have some that are individual actors, you have decision support tools, you've got enterprise-wide AI, you've got localized or domain-specific, and you need security around all that. So that's very confusing. Secondly, I think in a lot of firms, it takes 50 people to say yes and one person to say no. And I think a lot of leadership teams suffer from that consequence. And the one that says no generally is saying things like, well, it's not that accurate. There's a standard deviation in this stuff in these LLM models. Well, the reality is that may be so, and there is imperfection in AI, but how imperfect are the human systems, right? And that's oftentimes not addressed. And the third thing I would say is change management. I mean, I think people are afraid of change fundamentally, and in some cases, with large enterprises in particular, man, it is tough. It is hard to get things to move, and that is expensive and it's fraught with risk, and people like to avoid it. So it's like working out for a lot of people. So I think those three things are really creating a speed issue with this adoption. But I think people will find those procrastination levers will create a lot of imperative for change later, which they may not appreciate very much.
Steve. So let's get to I think the next question is around this agentic tipping point, which is all about, I think, less advising and more executing. Are we really facing more of a trust problem than a capability problem with AI? I've got some data here that just shows how 78% of enterprises, these are large enterprises, are really not trusting the AI. They're still keeping a lot of human interjection and supervision into the agentic, and only like 10% are actually fully engaging in this. Maybe Jesus, could you share a little bit about how you're seeing the evolution here?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Phil. And this goes all the way up to the boardroom. I literally had this week, we were preparing, we're working on our proxy for one of the companies that I'm in the board. And we had a question, and I actually basically had a research agent go through ISS, all precedent, a lot of paper, and come up with a recommendation on what we should do. And in this case, the chairman of the board came back. He's like, well, I'm glad you trust AI because I don't. And I said, well, you will. It's just a matter of time. But it was kind of interesting that what you said is and I think that the explanation that this person gave is like, well, I don't trust what I don't understand. And I said, well, do you get on a plane? Because I'm pretty sure you don't understand all the aerodynamics that go into that plane flying. So I think there is a bias I think that will get resolved in time. I think there is a couple of other things that get in the way when you get in the execution side. I think companies had a tough time changing decision rights. So decision rights is something, especially in large companies, that it takes a lot of convincing. It's almost kind of like 50 people have to say yes. Companies that they're not very innovative. I think there is a bias for inaction, meaning if you do something and it's wrong, you could get fired. But if you do nothing, you don't get fired. So you're basically motivating inaction as opposed to taking a risk. And the one thing that I'm hopeful about, I've seen actually one company build a observability layer of AI, meaning not only they just know how many tokens everybody's consuming, but what specific primitives of agents those tokens are being consumed. And then they can basically tell the people that they're using, because everybody raises their hand and says, oh, I'm using AI. But they can tell, well, yeah, you're using AI to rewrite emails or summarize articles, and somebody else is using AI to like vibe code. Somebody else is actually using AI to make decisions. I think then started surfacing that factual use creates a motivation for people then to come to the other side, which is to actually use AI for execution.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And getting people to share their personal experiences is a best practice within a company. People often don't. They feel like they got an edge because they figured out how to embed Claude into their PowerPoint and all sorts of other things they like to do. Another thing we picked up on is just this, like, there's a real lack of a strategy, and you can see here across Global 2000, these are leaders in organizations. Only 14% actually have a clear strategy with defined goals. Most are in development. Do you think, Cliff Justice, do you think this is a serious issue, or this is just a natural evolution of where we're going?
Well, some of it's natural. Some of it is it's still early for large enterprises to rewrite their whole business model and their whole operating model around something that's as transformative, especially as agents that actually carry out tasks. I think trust is paramount, but I wouldn't put it as binary either. There's going to be things that you'll trust the agents to do that really offload a lot of work that humans do. That if an agent does make mistakes, it's just not as critical. So trust will be seen as a different imperative in some areas than others, and this has to be engineered properly to the nature of the work. So if you think of agents, take autonomous cars or autonomous buses or autonomous planes. You'll probably have a pilot if you have planes carrying 200 or 300 people for quite a long time, because that's just a different calculus than a small drone taxi with one person, or drones that don't have any individuals in it. It's the level of risk and the impact when something goes wrong. And in many cases, enterprises, this is still very much a people business, and when decisions are made, somebody needs to be held accountable. And it's very difficult in these sort of murky strategic choices to hold an AI accountable for those decisions. If you're an executive, you really need experience and a person to hold accountable. And AI can assist in some of these more important high risk areas, but you still need an individual that that has that human-to-human trust in these areas, at least for the time being. This may be different in 3 or 4 years. Agents are going to get a lot smarter. They're going to be a lot smarter than us. Eventually, they may be managing us in 5 or 10 years. But at this point in the development, I wouldn't consider this binary. I would tier this across different functions, different roles across the organization.
Right. It's interesting. So let's get into then some of the things that are causing, I think, adoption issues. And let's start at cyber and giving agents system level access without machine speed security. It's reckless, right? So how do we architect trust? Steve Hill.
I think the first thing that organizations struggle with is what I'd like to start with, which is you've got to build trust in, you have to build security in by design. I mean, AI changes the game in a lot of ways. Unlike previous generations of technology that organizations have adopted, AI accelerates attacks to machine speed. So bad guys are using AI right now to attack organizations. And the speeds that are inherent in those attacks are more than humans can either monitor, detect, etc., or in an MSSP standpoint, monitor against as a service provider. There are new risks that AI brings to bear. There's new attack surfaces, and data and model drift and agent behaviors are all things that can happen to AI that you didn't have to worry about before. So there's a lot of fear around how to control this thing that people call AI. But where I think it starts to get easier when you start to think about this strategically, going back to the second point that you made, the one we just discussed, which is you start at the use case and you figure out what kind of machines, what kinds of AI you need, and you go from there, whether it's a deterministic system that works best or a probabilistic, which is generative AI, whether it's an agent you need or it's decision support. Let that guide, let the business guardrails kind of guide your confidence first, and then you move into the technology. And you do need capabilities here. You need people in your IT organization that understand AI, understand data, protecting data, managing data, model drift, and how to check on models. And you'll need third parties that can help you in this. And sometimes third parties will help you with a spike of services and capabilities and frameworks and controls that you need. But you don't need all that forever. So you'll hire that in the short term, and you'll go back to operating at a sort of more organic, indigenous pace later if you need to. But the reality is there are a lot of ways to get help in this conversation, but it certainly changes the game for the kinds of risks that organizations are facing today.
Yeah, thanks. And Mary, I know you're doing a lot of research into this area. How are you seeing enterprises getting exposed when it comes to like agentic investments and the issue of impacts of cyber?
Well, yeah, I think it's less sexy than we like to think. I love what Stephen said, because what I'm saying is you have to have a business case, and that's, I think, right. One company I was just dealing with last month said that their board kept yelling at their CEO saying, "What's your, where's your AI? Where's your AI? Where's your AI?" And arguing for an AI first strategy doesn't really make sense to me. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish as a business? And then what are your toolkits of AI? Just may be one of them. So I think that's one of my first messages about what's the same about managing AI is that you do need a solid business case. I do also like this idea. This actually came out of my colleagues at MIT Scissors. So I'll do a shout out, and I'll post a link to this article. They had this idea that for Gen AI, your traditional governance is too slow. Your all-in is too risky. So they have this idea of a minimal governance framework for Gen AI and sort of the Goldilocks sweet point. So I'm going to put that link in there, and I'll give a shout out and a thanks to our colleagues at MIT.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. So let's again get into, I think, these issues around, we talked a bit about the velocity gap. Let's get a bit more into these like debts, and we call it this debt overhang about, is it fragmented processes, crappy data, broken governance. They don't just slow AI adoption. And we really think, especially we dug deep into research here and I tried to understand what is holding enterprises back from achieving their goals when it comes to AI. Is the real issues are not so much around tech debt, which is widely, you read any McKinsey, Gartner, these companies, they already want to talk about these $2 trillion of tech debt. The biggest issue is process debt before everything else, even data and people. And then we've even looked at how big is process debt as part of, we think, like a $10 trillion debt pile that companies are suffering from, even though, it's essentially how do you size how screwed up the Global 2000 is. So how do we start to eradicate these debts? I mean, what do you think, Jesus? You've worked your whole career looking at the process issues of clients. How do you think they really make this work for AI?
I mean, I agree with your survey to start with. In my experience, the main question to ask is there clear and accountable process owners that have the competence and the mission to reinvent those outcomes by whatever mean? And by whatever mean, it could be they can outsource them, they can improve the technology, they can do whatever. I think in my experience, I have found out that the technical debt is a consequence with the answer of that question being no. Is that there really isn't an established governance around what their process and process outcomes are. And because of that, that actually results on technical debt. I'm working with a couple of companies right now, believe it or not, they're going through their ERP upgrade cycles. And that constant is still true, is there is no real benefit to just upgrade technology if there is no process ownership. Now, what AI does, it turbocharges the importance of that. Yeah. Because AI is a tooling that gives you a lot more degrees of flexibility. It gives you the ability to decouple with hardwire ERP processes that kind of like we were subject to before, where now you can very easily transcend those. But that only will work if there is clarity as to who's going to make those redesigning decisions and what is the goal that they're trying to achieve. So I think what I recommend the companies that I think they're doing more progress on this is start there. Start with the what Steve Jobs used to call the single accountable individuals. It's not a committee. It's just one person that says, you're going to redesign account receivables, and it's you, and that's it. And you make all the decisions. You can bring everybody, you can do as many design sessions as you want, but you're going to reinvent by all means necessary. In that context, then AI becomes extremely useful and adopted a lot faster. If right. not, then you end up with another 3-year ERP upgrade cycle.
Yeah, another 3-year. Yeah, I've seen those cycles even longer. I think that let's take this to the debt that we didn't discuss. And I know, Steve, you've got a big view here that it's really the leadership that holds it all back. So how do we build more trust from the leadership into getting away from compute not being the constraint? It's about conviction.
Yeah, I think going back to some of what we talked about, I think executives like AI. It sounds great, although to Mary's point, it's not necessarily as sexy as you think. It's a really good point to be made. It's got to start at the business cases. And I think it has to start with a sober view of how ready an organization is for the change that AI can bring to bear. I think change management is one of the biggest underappreciated needs of real transformation around AI. And I think leadership don't trust the fact that their people will have confidence in them if they don't speak the right words about how AI will enter the enterprise. A lot of people are afraid of AI. They're going to think that it's going to take my job. People start getting antsy, and they'll leave, or they will just be distracted by it. I think leadership has a big responsibility to focus on how to build the right messaging and how to build a journey around AI that is responsible and trusted in the organization. So, getting the right use cases put to the table first that aren't as disruptive as a lot of people might fear. Showing people that AI can help them in ways that is extraordinary. In fact, if you look at generative AI today, you look at what's happened since 2022 with the introduction of chat. I mean, people are leveraging AI every day today in their personal lives. So on their phones, they're using AI. They're going to chat or to Claude or to whomever, and doing a lot of things personally that are helping them in their own personal lives. So leverage that momentum to really, help the organization understand that kind of impact can happen at the enterprise level too, and help their jobs without taking them out of their job, but making them more impactful and important in their own jobs. So I think that is a big piece of the deficit in the C-suite.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So let's get.
I'm jumping in here. I'm jumping in.
Yeah,
You said
yeah.
we were allowed to jump in. I love what Stephen just said. I'm going to use the term culture too from leadership. And, I'm sitting here in the Sam M. Walton College of Business, so we're very close to Walmart's headquarters. And I have to say, I think Walmart is an example we can all look to on how you have good leadership in this context. For the longest time, their tagline has been that they are people-led, tech-powered. And their prior CEO and their new CEO, they think AI is going to transform nearly every job. And they've offered AI training to 1.6 million of their workers. And they've already deployed 4 super AI agents, one that is customer facing. If you're a Walmart customer, you'll see a little Sparky in your app, one that's for their associates, which are their employees, one for their suppliers, and one for the development environment. So in that context, when you say this is going to be in service to humanity, AI is in service to humanity, not the other way around, you really help take the fear away. And the other thing they've also done, which ties a little bit more back into what Jesus was talking about, is that for many of their leaders, particularly in their headquarters, their employees now have KPIs for agentic AI use that will be part of their annual performance evaluations. So I just wanted to give an example. We talk about the woe all the time. Just wanted to give an example of a big old traditional incumbent organization that I think is doing really well on addressing some of the issues that we're talking about in the leadership context.
Yeah, what are the challenges that they've had to overcome, Mary, to sort of get to this point, do you feel?
I think I'm going to go back to something Mark said, because they've been on this journey for a long time, right? Mark, you said that if you got good at RPA and good at other automations, that they've already had a lot of their pain point experiences. The other thing is their investment that they had made in good data. I think the first agentic AI case study we did at Walmart was published in the Harvard Business Review in November of 2022, where they were using AI agent chatbots to negotiate contracts with their tail end suppliers. I mean, that's a long time ago in the world of AI. So it's been, it's been such a long journey. I think the other thing that's a little special about Walmart is it's primarily, even though it's a public company, they have the family that owns a lot. So when the CEO says, I want to make long-term investments in our people, long-term investments in our technology, that there's more tolerance that you're not, you might affect the quarterly report next quarter. I think there's a little magic there to how Walmart will, is willing to make investments that may not immediately pay off, but definitely pay off in the long run.
Yeah, so you think having more private ownership changes the whole culture of courage and leadership? in many
I
cases.
do. I mean, there's a lot of pressure when you've got your quarterly earnings that you've got to report on. So that's where I think we see the pressure of AI washing or AI theater. Investors want to see you doing something with AI. But when you have, and many of you also work with private companies, right? When you take that pressure away, you can make better decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
great point.
Going into the next topic there, Phil, I think it's a great lead in, but I mentioned earlier, compensation and reward. I don't think larger enterprises are conspicuously rewarding people who are driving the change. Maybe behind the scenes, maybe there's a promotion, but they're not really ringing the bell and showing the rest of the organization these are the type of role models we're looking for. And I think HR is really behind on that. I'm not saying they should lead it, but just be more conspicuous about rewarding the behavior and those individuals that are making it happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, that gets us to this sort of whole talent reinvention conversation and getting beyond fear, driving towards confidence, and is the enemy the machine, etc. Malcolm, Frank, you live and breathe this stuff right now. Could you share a little bit about what you're seeing?
Sure. And I'll just put something out there. I think we all need to reframe this issue, and we have to stop protecting jobs and start expanding value. And that's how you're going to win. Because if we all think that we're at peak corporation, so as a result, healthcare is the best it's ever going to be, we're at peak transportation, peak education, peak government, then that's a stunning lack of imagination. So this is an ongoing narrative. We hear it every day. The machines are coming for our jobs. And I'm not going to insult anybody by saying that fear isn't real. Of course it is. It's deeply human. But every time we faced a productivity revolution, going back to the loom, the assembly line, the spreadsheet, up to client server, internet, digital, the people who thrived weren't the ones who clung to the old ways of work. They had the courage to redesign work and what it actually means. And I'd encourage people right now to go look at what Jack Dorsey's doing at Block. He's being very aggressive, but he's completely rethinking the structure of a corporation. And he's not just eliminating jobs with AI. He's turning the old hierarchy into a wirarchy, and in particular, rethinking middle management and replacing that with AI. So this is what we're in the middle of. We've got 75,000 people that we work with on our platform of pairing specific roles with specific models and automations. And you can get people who can do 10x the work and tackle problems that they could never tackle before. So I am very excited by that. This is a Cambrian explosion, but people need to reframe the issue. So stop protecting jobs, start expanding value. And I think with that, it's an unleash where instead of being paranoid, you get pretty optimistic and start implementing against it.
Right. I mean, so it's easy enough to say, let's stop protecting jobs, but the data's clear here. Over half employees, this is across larger corporates, just are plain scared. And you see what Oracle announced 30,000 layoffs this week. And I think that's not AI, that's just using AI as an excuse, right? But how do we get past this fear of AI to more confidence and more excitement? Because I think, we also look at the sheer lack of training. So I think 80% of the Global 2000 get fewer than 10 hours of training a year. So what are the things we need to do, Malcolm, to get over this?
I think that where we're stuck, and we've been having this conversation, it's been transcending all of your questions, Phil, is folks are trying to boil the ocean. And when they boil the ocean, that's where it just feels too big and you get stuck. The firms I'm seeing that are being most successful are going after the low-hanging fruit with AI and then communicating that back to their talent. So I think of an outside in and bottom up framework. So what is outside in? If you're a Fortune 500, every Fortune 500 spends hundreds of millions on outside vendors. So PR services, marketing, IT, you can go through the whole list. Those are the areas that they should be automating very, very aggressively. and doing that with their employees, because that's money you're spending on outside resource. It's not a threat to your employees. And you got fault tolerance. You can still keep the slow old manual vendor helping you as you're building that automation in parallel. So we're seeing this, for example, with customer service operations. That area is white hot with Sierra and AWS Connect and others, where they're taking that methodology. The second is bottom up, that when you look at your functions in HR, in finance, marketing, those are all knowledge-based functions that are ripe for this level of AI enhancement. And your employees, they want to see that. If they don't see that positive momentum, then the malaise sets in and the victimization narrative starts to come in, because they recognize that their employer is not helping them with this journey. So the firms that are not moving on this, that's where the rumor mill starts, that's where the fear starts, and it shows up in some of the charts that you're outlining here.
Right. So again, go back to that velocity gap conversation. I mean, Jesus, do you have some thoughts on this? I know this isn't a
I do. I think I've thought a lot about this for a long time, as you know, Phil. And I think it takes a couple of things. There's not just one thing that you can do that fixes it, but it takes, to start with, it takes leaders with a lot more imagination, creativity, and courage to see the value side of this. I think that was a really good point. But the other side is most large companies, they love to look from the company out. And I think you have to reverse. It's like in gaming, when you go from like looking at the map to the first player view, you have to look at this from a first player view of each employee and actually frame the problem as, here's an employee with fears, with a context, with objectives, with motivations that in some cases are in direct contradiction to the motivations and the incentives of that company. And that is what needs to be designed to be reconciled. And the framework that helped me in my prior firm is we actually came up with a framework that has three simple premises. We call it make it clear, make it easier, make it worth it. So every single quarter, we would make clear what the desired behavior change was. In this case is, hey, we want you to adopt this kind of AI tools for this kind of work. You make it very clear, this is what it means adopting, this is what doesn't mean adopting. A lot of people fail on that first one because people say like, oh, I'm doing all of that. It's like, no, you're not doing it well. You never made it clear. The second one is you make it easier. Human behavior is easier to nudge when you give the human an architecture, a choice architecture that is A, B. So if A is don't use it and B is use it, make B easier to do than A. Most companies are in the reverse. It's actually really hard to do what they're telling you to do, therefore you end up not doing it. And then the third one, which is make it worth it, is all the visible incentives and role modeling, align it with that thing that you said, right? So in other words, who gets recognized, as we mentioned, are the people that do this better. So people can have a model of like, oh, so if I do like that, then I'm going to do well. Here's the interesting thing, and sorry to take a little longer, is in most companies still, the reason why you get promoted is in direct opposition to you actually using AI. Because in many companies, it's still like, hey, you need to have like 100 people reporting to you before you get promoted. Well, do you think I'm going to be motivated to actually automate anything? Or will I be better not automating and having a lot more people reporting to me so I can get promoted and then it's somebody else's problem? So what I call the HR firmware needs to be adjusted to do that. And I think this is tractable. I mean, I think but you have to look at it as a design framework. And I agree with Mary. I think Walmart is one of the best examples I can think of actually doing this at scale. They're very intentional. They're very consistent. They're committed top to down. The last thing that I will do is in a recent company, somebody came back to the board and said, well, here's our like 3-year program to adopt AI. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, there is no such a thing as a 3-year program. I mean, that's like lifetimes. So how do we change that? So what I did is I actually had them go visit China. So I said, you're going to go spend 2 weeks in China and come back. They came back, and that 3-year program was 7 months because they actually got to see people move at a speed that they didn't believe could be imposed to them. But when they actually saw it, they said, oh, we want to be like that. They came back, and it didn't take a lot of pushing and shoving and negotiating. They came back, it's like, yeah, we're going to do this in 7 months.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of companies have 3 years, unfortunately. Yeah. All right, let's get on to the next topic, which is the wonderful industry of convergence of services and software, and the way that we're seeing this industry emerge. You can see we had this tech vision. We actually reduced it to 2028 from 2030, but you can see the shift away from effort-based services to platform tech-based services. This AI phase that I think we're still in an early phase of now, towards true services and software. And our research shows this is where enterprise clients want to go. They're aspiring to get to services, software, outcome-driven models within sort of 3-4 years. This is really what we're seeing going on in the industry. And you can even see different ways that the SaaS and ERP traditional world is converging with service providers and natives to drive this shift. Let's hear from, maybe Malcolm, do you want to kick this off? You've spent much of your career in services. How quickly do you see this playing out, and who do you think is going to win and who's going to lose in this game?
Yeah, it's starting to play out very quickly, Phil. And we've got a parallel. We've lived through this before. We just don't recognize it as such. That with cloud, I think most everybody in this call can remember when you wanted to do anything 15 years ago, you had to get the Oracle database, you had to get the Sun server, you had to stand the whole thing up, and then you could get started. But that was $250,000. It was going to take you a couple of months before you produced anything. And of course, what do you do now? You just go up to the cloud and boom, you're off and running. So that is an output or an outcome that cloud has provided. And the same is starting to happen in services. And it's sort of perplexing to me, Phil, a little bit depressing, but it's weird that when I look at all of the GSIs, most of them are treating AI as the next tech market opportunity, pretty selfishly. And the way we saw it with SAP or Salesforce or AWS, they're going after it as a revenue opportunity as opposed to fundamentally changing their means of production. And clients are figuring this out. The client just hears, you're just protecting your billing model. You're not solving my problem in a completely new way. So instead of selling by the hour, selling by the body, selling the effort, you're exactly right. This is why I'm so excited about what you're doing. The new game is services as software. So sell the outcome, sell the result. But the GSI community is going through a classic Clayton Christensen innovator's dilemma. What do you do when you're a publicly traded company and your unit cost drops 50%, 70%? And most of these firms, the way they're run is at an account level. So if you're the client partner, and let's just say that American Express is your account, and last year you billed them $100 million. Well, if you went full outcome and full service as software, you may bill for the same amount of stuff, 40 million. Are you going to drive that down, or are you going to go through price elasticity and start to provide much more value for the same amount of money? That is a really, really hard challenge. And the way that these firms are motivated in terms of how they manage street expectations and how they set expectations all the way through the pyramid, that is a radical change that needs to occur. So, in a rational world, a startup would never exist. But we've seen this where the league tables in IT services change all the time, with the grand exception of Accenture. And I think we're going to go through a window of incredible churn because most of those firms aren't going to be able to manage that change in their economic model, in their delivery model, and in the way they motivate their staff.
See,
Yeah. If I can jump in there, Malcolm, that's so true. All the infrastructure, everything that has been built by these large firms to optimize delivery, optimize performance, optimize outcomes are the very things that are not needed in this new world. There's never been a better time in my career, or probably even in anybody's lifetime, on this call to start a native AI startup and go after these industries, because managing that type of economic turmoil when you are a large company that has to support this infrastructure that has been built, it's a very challenging and very costly transition to move into this area. You have to, this idea of that you've alluded to, this Jevons paradox idea that has followed every industry through all the disruptions from the loom to industrial revolution. That's happening here too. It's just the time in which you have to make those adjustments is so much shorter. You've got, I read, I don't know if it was your research or somebody else's, but the industrial revolution unfolded over 50 years. This is going to be something like 5. And the impact of this is going to be 10 times larger than the industrial revolution. So you're talking just an order of magnitude or more in terms of impact and disruption to the very industry that we're talking about here. And these are the folks that are selling the transformation and the services. Clients are very keen on the defensive language here. You're selling protection of your business, and all it takes is a few innovative services. They may be the frontier companies themselves that build these tools and these technologies that erode your own business, and just build them as features on the agentic platforms. But the disruption is coming, and it's coming very quickly, and clients are very keen on understanding how this market is going to drive better outcomes for them. They don't care about your business and protecting your business. They care about driving more value into their business. And at the same time, their business is being disrupted as well. They've got asymmetric competition coming on their flank in their core business, across multiple sectors. So there's just never been a better time in history to start one of these businesses, and you're starting to see many of these emerge.
If I may, Malcolm, I think the cloud analogy is a great one. I think another one is offshoring. The GSIs were challenged with that. They were using offshoring resources before their clients. They were making more money on it. The clients got smart. How do you figure that out? So that's definitely going on. I think one of the canaries in the coal mine, or the AI coal mine, is the customer experience function, division, where it used to be labor-based call center BPOs. And it's fascinating. We have a client who provides advisory services to the buyers of customer experience and call center, and they have retooled over the past 2 years to be equally fluent on the labor side and the AI side. And the difficulties they have in coaching and training legacy call center customer experience providers to actually provide AI solutions without compromising their margins or their street guidance on earnings is incredibly difficult. So I think that's a good business function to look at, to see the speed that the provider and the customers are trying to pedal to keep up with that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Someone mentioned Jevons paradox, Cliff did, and someone else in the audience has put in a question on this. But essentially, it's as intelligence gets cheaper and easier to access and easier to scale, you want more of it, right? And so if you're delivering I don't know, accounts payable, collections, or some sort of fairly back officey transactional service, you can now deliver that 80% cheaper. You move to new areas you can help your clients, like supply chain planning, inventory control, better data analysis and that sort of thing. So isn't it that these providers have to just expand their capabilities beyond just delivering, transactional work that can be fairly easily agentified?
And I think that occurs up and down the stack, Phil. So it occurs, the Jevons paradox is going to occur in the client organizations themselves, in the entire supply chain that serves that client, including this segment of that supply chain for that client. So, the economics for services and soon to be products as physical AI comes on the scene are just totally being rewritten. And the challenge is the speed at which it's being rewritten. How fast can the governance mechanisms that are in place right now adapt to this new reality? How can a company safely and responsibly transition and capture all of the value with all of the systems, all of the people and change issues, everything that the regulatory capture, everything that is constraining change? How can companies adapt to this asymmetric threat when you have these AI native, we used to call them digital native, but these AI native companies that are building everything from the ground floor on an increasingly declining cost of technology and tokens. And then if you're building everything on these tokens and the tokens are becoming more abundant, your limitation to offering these services are declining. And then as physical AI comes on the scene in a couple of years, that's going to translate into human labor as well, into physical labor. So the business models of not just the service providers, but the companies themselves are adapting. So thinking through how you're going to be serving a changing client business model, because they're going through the same disruption, is that's going to determine the next $1 trillion companies.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So let's finish up with we had a comment from Vinod Khosla, the famous entrepreneur, technopreneur, California-based now, but he predicted that ID services, the way it is just going to be dead in 2030. So let's think a bit more about, can this industry survive where we're going here? Is India in a perilous situation because it's built up millions of jobs in GCCs and service providers to support the way it was? Will this services industry be around in any shape or form the way it is in 2030? Maybe Malcolm, you want to kick that one off?
It's a great question. So, Phil, I'll give you a new equation of acronyms. EDS plus CSC plus HP equals which. And we've seen this before, and it's starting to happen again. And I've learned this over my career. Wall Street may misvalue a specific company for a short period of time, but it almost never misvalues an entire category. So that 100 billion is very real, and people should recognize it as such. And there's a logic to it. Wall Street looks at AI hitting the GSI model, and it can't figure out the terminal value. You can't determine what are the 5-year cash flows of these firms. And as such, they're just getting out. So that's the bad news for those firms. The good news is, we've talked about it on this call from the demand perspective, the client needs are only going to expand. And all of these clients are going to become much more tech-centric as a result of AI. So I think the services model is going to expand. But those firms that can't switch quickly enough are going to become the new versions of CSC and EDS, where they just have these slow and incredibly painful to watch. They're not even deaths. They just become irrelevant. So, if folks don't like change, they're going to like irrelevancy even less. So of that category, I don't think this is a function of India. I think it's just a function of what leaders have the courage to recognize what is the new delivery model for services and move to it very, very quickly and aggressively.
I agree with you, Malcolm. I think what is a irony is that as much as customers get frustrated with the lack of innovation and speed and adoption from their GSIs or service providers, the irony is that those service providers are some of the most agile animals for self-preservation, decades beyond their expiration date. And many of them just keep innovating with the changes we've talked about, offshoring, cloud, client server. They're still around because they know how to do that. I think the other vendor category is SaaS companies, the SaaS Armageddon and so on. And that is overblown unless they are over leveraged in the private credit market. The public markets, some great research came out of Raymond James recently through February, showing that, key metrics of these publicly traded SaaS companies are actually improving. So their bookings growth is accelerating. Their remaining performance obligations are accelerating and extending. So what's happening is for those SaaS companies, they're cutting slightly better terms to get their customers to sign up for more years, but it's not impacting their gross margin. So to summarize that, these large service providers and SaaS companies are very, very sophisticated. We'll read about the ones that die because they make great case studies. You think of like BlackBerry versus the iPhone, but most of them will adapt.
I think that's true, Mark. I don't know if most of them will adapt, but I think you do have to look at it company by company because if you look at the entire market, it's a big market. And most of those companies, the companies that there's many companies that are out there that are very sophisticated. They're going to adapt. They're doing very well. They happen to be Indian-based companies. But if your value proposition is still on selling cheaper hourly labor, the clock is ticking for you. If your value proposition is outcomes to your client and you're able to manage and navigate that transition from low-cost labor to outcome orientation, whatever the economic model is with your client, you're able to deliver that profitably with a different labor profile, then you're going to be successful. And there are several high-profile Indian companies, I think, that are doing a great job at that. But that's not what's reflecting in these numbers. The numbers are there are many companies out there that aren't quite as well known, that make up a significant part of the labor pool, that are not navigating that change very well. They have nothing in their strategy to do that. They tend to live at the bottom of that pyramid in staff augmentation and in low cost staffing, and I think that's what's going to make a dent in the overall macro numbers that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Well, we got a little time left. We've had a lot of Q&A from the audience, and I think we've answered most of the questions throughout this fabulous last hour plus of talk. So I'm going to get everybody to just sum up one thing that they really took away from today's conversation that they'll implement in their own post-retirement, whatever they're doing, jobs tomorrow. So maybe Malcolm, what was the one big takeaway you've got from today?
I'm looking at Jesus. This is an IBM thing. Remember Lou Gerstner's book on teaching the elephant to dance. And we need to teach elephants to dance because AI is moving at 100. Individuals are adopting it at 10, and big companies are adapting at a pace of 1. That ratio is going to break a lot of companies. So how can we get that clock speed of these organizations to move faster? And I think don't boil the ocean, but find those use cases, as Mark was saying. For example, customer support is one. Find those where you can enable those very aggressively with AI. The firm will learn, it builds confidence, and then you can just go step by step and start to build from there. So that's my takeaway.
Thanks. Terrific. Mary Lastic, one big takeaway.
Yeah, I love to collect practices that I can share with others. And my favorite one came from Jesus. Make it clear, make it easy, make it worthwhile. I love that.
There you go. So that would, Cliff, what did you take away from all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is, the defensive companies are always going to be on their back foot and will probably get overtaken by the companies that are really.
Cliff, I think you froze there.
It's. Yeah. Am I frozen?
Yeah, you froze.
Just come back.
All right.
Now you're good.
All right. So the companies that go on the offense are going to be the companies that win. And these are going to be the companies that innovate, that change their business model, that drive change. It's going to be uncomfortable. The larger the company, the more uncomfortable it's going to be for the workforce and for the markets. It will require visionary leadership to step into this new business model and these new worlds. But I don't think there's ever been an opportunity greater than the one we're in right now to make these changes and shake up the market.
Thanks, Cliff. Mark?
Yes, Mary talked about best practices. There's a fascinating practice. I can't name names, unfortunately, but some larger corporations are making some acquisitions that are basically going to be the guinea pigs for how they adopt AI for the acquiring company. So they're giving that new subsidiary, that new acquisition, permission to change things, break things, fail in ways that I am not used to seeing from larger organizations. So I think that's could be an interesting model that you buy to experiment and break as opposed to just absorb and assimilate.
Yeah, they're like Oracle and NetSuite many years ago, right?
That's a good example. Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Okay, Steve Hill, one big takeaway from today.
Yeah, I think I think Mary mentioned this, but I think one of the key things to making this happen in a positive way is culture. I mean, leadership has to guide this, and I think leading from fear is the wrong first step. You've got to look at this as an opportunity. Yes, clock speed is a challenge, and that has to be adequately considered in the messaging and in the actions. But you've got to lead with confidence, and you have to lead with an offensive strategy. I think to Cliff's point, there are lots of things that need to be put in place from a communication standpoint at the executive team level, with the board, and with your employees, and having that, taking a very positive approach to that, and looking at this as a cultural transformation as well as an organizational or process change transformation opportunity is super important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Steve. So who better to finish this off than Jesus Montes? One big takeaway from today.
I think, my takeaway is confirmation that it's not a technology issue, it's not a technology challenge, it's a people behavior and organization design. And we don't have enough really, really good people on that. I think the technology will work. I think is how we rewire the organizations, who does what, and then how we rewire the interest. I mean, think about that. The org charts that we use to operate most of our companies were designed like 200 years ago. It definitely, it can possibly be the best way to organize the work. So I think my takeaway is confirmation from my fellow panelists here that I think the bigger work is if we fix that, I think everything else will get fixed.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of this stems back to middle management bureaucracy. It's held us back for a long time, but more than ever. And I've seen big agentic deals really struggle because the C-suites decide what they want to do, and then they go down to their teams below them, and it's at that level that they really struggle with the change. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. These organizations aren't designed for 2030. They're designed for 2015 or 2010. And that needs to be a big shift. Well, this has been a terrific hour and a bit, and we're going to share a recording and a write-up of this on hfsresearch.com in the next few days. And I just wanted to thank everybody here for their time. Really thank you all as well for being part of our Global Advisory Board. And this is what we're meant to do, is get together, share our collective views, and learn from each other and share it with the industry. So I look forward to seeing many of you in New York City for our summit in May 13, 14. And thank you very much for your time today.